With that, Tamara, the stage is yours. And again, thank you so much, Justin, for being here with us. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I hate to be the person that's responsible for ending the conversation about money and how much money you bring in and how much money you get back. That's not a good position to be in. But I'm glad Fern got to finish. Thanks everyone for being here. We have a as no thanks to me, but as in many of these sessions, we have a really super guest today. Justin Lonan is Executive Vice Chancellor of the Dallas Community College, which I'm going to give away our headline. The Dallas Community College used to be 9 colleges, and I might have the number wrong, 11, 9, something like that. Now it's 1. And this happened in the last 6 to 9 months. If your heads are not exploding, they probably should be. I mean, this was just like CUNY. This was, again, we have a number X, and forgive me, I should have gotten that straight before I said it, but the campuses spread out across a big city. And Dallas is not, in case you're New York centric and you live in that map where you can't see beyond the Hudson, Dallas is a big city. I think, number 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 4 number in size American cities in population. They had 11 campuses, 9 campuses. Again, I should have prepared this. Justin will straighten it all out. Spread out across the city, and they decided to consolidate. And so, I'm not recommending, I don't think Justin or I are saying CUNY should do that tomorrow before everybody gets out their pitchfork and drives us away. But I think there are some lessons to be learned there. And I think they're reaping great benefits in Dallas. So we'd have a conversation about what they're doing, why they did what they did, what they're doing, and how it's paying off. So Justin, thank you for being here. Now, correct me, how many campuses were there?
Yeah, so there are seven colleges previously with a number of satellite locations. We have 63 early college, high school, dual credit, P-Tech high schools that we operate in partnership. So, we're Dallas County wide. Dallas County is about 1,000 square miles is what our service area is.
What's the population of Dallas?
So Dallas County that we serve is about 2.5 million. And then it's really in the 4 county, the DFW area that you hear so much about, that we push 7 to 8 million people here.
So it's New York. I mean, it's New York and Texas. So this is not this is not Peoria. This is not your little town. We're not back in Kansas. Okay, so we established that. So tell us, I mean, how did this come about? What pressures led to this? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that well, first of all, I've been here 15 years, and since 2005, I have served. I'm the longest serving member of our executive team. So I've kind of seen the shifts and the bits and changes all along the way. But we started trying to work together better, and so our current chancellor came here about 7 years ago, and about 6 months before he came, the leadership team, led by a couple of the presidents of our colleges, got together and said, we should probably learn to work better together before this new chancellor gets here. And so they started on some initiatives, and it just didn't really get very far. And so, you kind of fast forward, new leadership comes in with a new eye, and we started talking about some things like doing a voluntary retirement incentive for faculty. And so we started looking at that, and what we discovered
with the easy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. What we discovered was there were 22 different ways in which faculty could be compensated and get extra service and load. And that was because of the differences of the way things were administered at the colleges. And so we started looking at those differences deeper. We did a student experience study where we actually trained some of our folks to follow shadow students, engage with them over a period of 6 months. And what we found was the experience was very different for them from location to location, and not always in a positive sort of way. And so as we started peeling back some of those policies, some of those practices, what we found, quite frankly, were some things that were very institution-centric and weren't student-centric. And also, you know, there are legitimate flags and guardrails that SACS, our accrediting body, put in place amongst our colleges. But quite frankly, there were other things that were non-issues where the SACS flag would kind of get thrown as a way to maintain that difference. And so then as we got deeper into data, I appreciate the data reference earlier, we were finding that because of the SACS 25% rule, that meant that, you know, students had to take 25% of their courses from one location, that we had students that were having to take extra classes because they were floating between our colleges. And so I did a presentation one time to our board that showed that our largest college, our fastest growing college, our most successful college was in fact the College of Swirl. The college that of Swirl are those students that went to more than one of our locations. So they didn't have a college, they had multiple colleges. And so that caused us to go, okay, well, students are figuring out a way around some of our institutional barriers. And so let's take a look at that a little bit further. And again, when we discovered that our own structure was standing in the way of student success through that 25% rule, we thought we need to take a look at the structure. We had already been working together what we called a career connected learning network that really was about putting the student at the center and supporting the student to, through, and beyond us. So the career connected network included, well, we know that students have hunger issues. So how can we partner with the North Texas Food Bank to provide pantries at all of our locations and provide food to students in need? We know that transportation is a barrier for some of our students. If you don't have reliable transportation, then how do you get to class? So we worked with the local public transit authority that we decided if you took 6 hours from us, we would provide free public transportation to you. We established the Dallas County Promise. So if finances were an issue, we could alleviate that. So we couldn't go pick up every student for class. We couldn't feed every student. We couldn't, you know, pay for everything they needed, but we could partner with others that could. And so that kind of became the network, expanding the network out. But the network also included our 7 colleges. And by bringing that outside-in approach, caused us to have to work more closely internally. And so it was really that network that kind of led us to this informal sort of thing that then led to what next steps may look like. And we ultimately did we were working on a bond campaign. That's how we pay for facilities down here, or through issuing public bonds. And so we were going to do a $1.1 billion bond campaign for construction of some new facilities. But before we got to the capital improvement plan, we were working on an education master plan, really the first one that we had done as the Dallas County Community College District, comprising of all the 7 colleges. And that educational master plan also forced us to kind of work together. But it's hard to do that when you have 3 separate nursing programs, you have different competing programs. And the consultants that we use with the educational master plan are really the ones that said, okay, come on, you know, you're nibbling around the edges here. But if you're really going to do this and to do this in a way that ultimately benefits students, you're going to have to make the decision if you want to unify and go through that process to move from 7 separately accredited colleges into 1 accredited college.
So talk a little bit before we get to that, the moment the guillotine falls, or whatever we're going to call that, the moment that the fat lady sings. the colleges are different, right? I mean, this is that you had different cultures, different communities. I mean, talk a little bit about what kind of family you were pulling together.
Yeah, very much so. So again, like I said, it's 1,000 square miles in which we operate. So our 7 colleges are spread out across Dallas County, and are very unique, are very different, have very different cultures. But again, what we found, as I talked about the students that swirled and went to more than one of our institutions, is that it may be because of schedule reasons. I mean, I'll just, again, I'm going to share the good and the bad and the ugly with you guys. One of the things we found is that at one of our colleges, because of the sequence of scheduling, you could not graduate in 2 years to get an associate's degree. Because the schedule was largely driven by faculty at that college. So, that was kind of a bit of a barrier. But again, with students going to more than one, they were getting a little experience of multiples, where we were proudly focusing and touting the differences. But our largest college at the time, Richland College, was about 21,000 students. But we had 26,000 students that were going to multiple locations. And so I spent time as interim president of one of our campuses, one of our colleges at the time, Brookhaven College. And while I was there as interim president, it's during the registration period, and I'm seeing the email traffic that says, oh my gosh, if we don't open these sections and do this, these students are going to go to Northlake College or they're going to go to Richland College. And so I said, well, okay, then what are we doing to help them get there? If that's what works for them, if that's what makes sense for them. But that was a very different culture focus, because obviously there's the funding formula, not only allowed, but encouraged that competitive nature about getting that enrollment. And, we had a 55-year legacy in history as the Dallas County Community College District. We have faculty that have been with us for, 40 plus years. We have some that have been with us 50 years that have taught at that one location. And so the Kool-Aid is pretty strong at the locations. And so the culture piece is the biggest thing that has, that is a challenge, will continue to be a challenge. But when we reorganized into schools of, and went from the 7 colleges, went into a model that just coincidentally is 7 schools of arrangement, but that allowed some branding and some and home for faculty and others that sort of took geography out of it and put commonality into it.
So typical schools, that's like the School of Liberal Arts and the School of
School of Law and Public Service, School of Allied Health Programs,
Right.
STEM, those sort of things.
Got it. So, okay, so how did you actually do the deed? So let's mention the Chancellor's name, because the Chancellor you'll hear about the Chancellor in other meetings, Joe May, celebrated thinker on these issues nationwide. So how did you do the deed? It sounds like the accreditors are number one, the school.
Yeah. So, you start with governing board, right? So our board is locally elected to 6-year terms. We have some board members that have been here, 20 plus years, and some that are newer. And we would, our regular board presentations, of course, we would have our presidents come and talk about all the great things going on at their locations. But we also started over a period of time, as we were looking at the data, when you look at from a system level, you look at how you can change behavior. Dr. May has talked about it in terms of, there's the power of the purse. There's the budget allocation that comes out of the system level. So budget can change and alter behavior. There's influence that you can use at the system level to do that. And there's policy. can change policy that we can take to the board, that can change behavior. And then somewhere along the way that I added another one, which was public shaming.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, information.
Yeah, let's just show the data
Yeah.
and not hide from it.
Yeah.
Let's just show where the gaps are. Let's talk about the gaps. Let's identify the gaps. So we began to do that with in those governing board meetings, and so once we got into the educational master plan part, once we were looking at the nearly 1,000 students that were impacted because of the SACS 25% rule. They couldn't graduate that semester. They had all the right number of credits, they just didn't have them from the place that they needed. So, so as Dr. May had, as we'd worked over a period of years building this career connected learner network, and we kept finding where there were gaps, where we weren't doing as well in some of the traditional measures, completion and placement and other things, retention. We had a real kind of come to Jesus meeting with our leadership team and looking at some of that data. And Dr. May said, okay, either we have a leadership problem or we have a structural problem. And so, fast forward a little bit, it turned out to be a little bit of both in some ways. But we decided to attack the structure part. We engaged in the conversation with our board, showed them the good and the bad and the challenges that would come out of it. And quite frankly, they acted very quickly. So it was in I guess it would have been in their June or August, I don't remember, I have to go back, 2019 board meeting where they formally said, let's consolidate. Let's unify into one college. So Joe and I, the Chancellor and I, got on a plane that 2 days later flew to Atlanta to go meet with SACS, meet with the accrediting body, to have that conversation and to kind of begin that process.
And what is it? Does SACS push back, or do they say whatever you want? Like, what's the sort of posture?
Yeah, no, their reaction was a little mixed.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, every time our 7 colleges had gone through reaffirmation, they were having to do a little bit of a wink and a nod on some things to demonstrate their how they were separate and what their autonomy looked like, because we had one governing board. So that meant one set of policy, one set of finances, one set of audit. So those things, I mean, when we first went down for the meeting, it included all of the liaisons, the SACS VPs that had worked with our 7 colleges, and the extended SACS team. The extended SACS team started talking first, going, okay, well, here's what consolidation looks like. Typically, consolidation is when you've got one institution that is failing and failing financially, typically, and the other is taking them over, and so you got to combine all of these things. And the people that were familiar with us at SACS, the liaisons kind of went, well, they already kind of do some of that. Some of that is already kind of taken place, but it's on the academic side. It's the curriculum side, it's the faculty side, it's a different program side, which is where the creditors also spend a lot of time. And so are those differences where we had to really engage in a lot of dialogue with them. But they were helpful in helping to help us to think through what this could look like. But it is the largest consolidation that SACS has ever done.
Right.
And so, we went through that process fairly quickly, and I could bore you with details, and we can get into a deeper.
Well, let's hear the bloody part. Like, there must be, like a lot of blood on the floor. I mean, let me just speak to the largest. I mean, systems all over the country are copying you now. Connecticut is copying you. Hawaii wants to copy you. This is not like just, I mean, you're setting a precedent. So I'm sure you know that. I'm sure they all call you up and say, how do we do this? But let's talk about the hard part.
Yeah. So there's lots of hard part, right? So, coming back from Atlanta, as a Chancellor, I were on the plane, and it was kind of one of those, well, now what? How are we going to do this? And so, and this is on the plane. We're just chatting and having the conversation, and we discussed and agreed that one of our college presidents should probably lead this transition effort. Just positionally, it made sense that one of them helped do that. And so, again, at the time, I was serving in my dual role as EVC and interim president at Brookhaven College. And so I organized all the presidents up at Brookhaven College to meet in the president's conference room up there, and with the chancellor that next week after going to Atlanta. So we could kind of put our heads together of how we would do this. And Chancellor May doesn't surprise me very often, but he surprised me in that meeting because he said, yeah, we need to figure out how to do this transition, and I'm going to have Justin lead it. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought we were going to have one of the presidents engage in this. But I pulled together a cross-functional team of our vice presidents. Each college had at least 3 or 4 vice presidents, different functional areas, pulled them together, pulled faculty together in those cross-functional teams. So all of the locations were represented and various levels. So
cross-functional meaning like you had the academic vice presidents talk to each other, and then you had the finance vice presidents talk to each other like that. Is that what you mean?
I did. And then I had one that had representative groups that was kind of everybody coming together that could represent the VPIs, the vice presidents of instruction, the voice in the conversation. And so, but mind you, this is August, right? The timeline in which we were operating on was we were going to take it to the December SACS board meeting, which meant we had about 6 weeks to write our prospectus and get it to SACS. And so we were moving very quickly. We got a lot of flack about moving too quickly. Now, as it turned out, that's not the timeline we stuck to. We did not take it to the December SACS meeting. We took it to the following June. And the primary reason that we did that was to not let off the gas, but we were also seeking a level change to offer a 4-year degree at the same time with SACS. And we needed to kind of consolidate that to happen. So the SACS board was considering those 2 actions at the same time. And so that's what happened that June, is when they considered our consolidation. They also considered the level change, which meant once they unified us, we were a 4-year granting degree institution. But that little nuance caused us to wait until the June, which obviously provided more time, more engagement. And we had been doing the engagement part as it led up to the board conversation decision anyway. But where the rubber met the road meant that it was awkward for some of the folks that I pulled together that were not sure what their own fate looked like.
Yeah, sure.
The fate of their own institution, the fate of their own role. And I remember a conversation with some of the vice presidents at the time, as we were talking about structure, where one of them said, well, wait a minute, are we designing a structure that may not include our role?
Yeah. So let's fast forward to that, beyond the process. Like, what does it look like? What are the sort of features, if you live in it, if you live in the new house, what does it feel like? What does it look like? How do things work?
Yeah, so the moving into the school of arrangement, and again, mind you, this is all still pretty fresh because we did take it to the June SACS board meeting last June. Of course, we moved into the pandemic environment last March, and so we were writing the prospectus, the consolidation piece, to go to them while we were still in this pandemic mode. But they gave us the thumbs up last summer. And so then we, began moving as quickly as we could, doing all the triggers that we had to do legally to move from the Dallas County Community College District to Dallas College. But so there's a lot of policy unification that we've got to do, process procedures. But here's, again, moving into the school of alignment allows, a more focused opportunity for students. It allows, again, as you know, for faculty, a common home, commonality. And here's the way that I think about this and talk about this a lot, is that we had such pockets of greatness that existed all over, but they were in their silo. You know, a great little academic program or great leader, a great initiative, but this allowed us to lift it up, lift the lid, lift it up out of its silo and carry it across now the unified Dallas College. And so, but that means pain points of, you know, you heard me say 3 nursing programs earlier. Well, okay, so we got to go through and decide what's the one surviving program. And so, you know, that's not always been an easy conversation.
And what happened to all the other people? They're like, what happened to the faculty and the deans and the whatever of the other nursing programs?
Yeah, well, so the first part of what we did, the January January of 2020, before we went to SACS with the formal prospectus at the June board meeting, which we had to submit to them in March. So, you know, you just keep backing up in the timeline. Chancellor and I spent time with the Boston Consulting Group. We hired BCG to help us with the change transformation and to help identify and look at other structures. So that's what we did. We looked at structures at all kinds of different colleges and universities, and sort of took what we saw as the best version, and we rolled that out in January to everyone and said, okay, we are going to unify the academic side that used to report up to the vice presidents of instruction, that reported to the presidents of the 7 colleges. And now we're going to have a provost model that all of the instruction reports up through the provost office. And so, you know, it unified that and unified the school of within that. We organized the student success side to do the same thing. So used to be vice presidents of student success that reported to the president. Now it all reports to a vice chancellor of student success. And then we did the same thing with workforce and advancement. And so it unified all of those things into kind of those 3 buckets. And then there's all the operation stuff, HR, marketing, all of the finance, all that stuff that we also unified because there were vice presidents of business. And so the question about people obviously is the most difficult part of the equation, because we knew we had inefficiencies. We knew that some areas within the 7 colleges were overbuilt, overprescribed. And so when we pulled those new structures together, we put new leadership in those. That's a whole long process I can talk about too, that with the people part, as we've rolled out the structure, we've started with the internal first. So for almost all the roles, some are pretty unique that we look external, but to give our internal people opportunity to compete in those roles. So that first level and first layer of provost and those 2 vice chancellors, those were internal talent that were put in those roles. But the people part meant that not everybody was going to have a seat. You know, it is the cruelest game of musical chairs. But we've got really talented people. We want to give them opportunity to compete. But we also did something that we never done as a system before, which is put together a very generous severance package for those that couldn't stay.
So do you give numbers, like how many high-level leadership people did you lose?
Yeah. So in the we had 26 vice presidents across the system, and there are let me count here right now. There are about half of them that found a new role in a new home in the structure, and others that didn't.
And how about presidents?
Yeah, presidents. So the first meeting that we had, that one that I referenced, that we pulled together the presidents after coming back from Atlanta, the chancellor said, what do you think should be the role of the presidents in this new structure? And the first president that spoke up said, I think that the president should be the chief academic officer of the campus. He came through the academic side. That is not, as I said, that's not the way that's not the way we designed it. We went with the provost model, so the president does not have authority or responsibility for that. He made the decision. He self-selected and retired and left. This was not the role for him. The other presidents are in various stages of figuring it out, because the role is what I describe as an enhanced role of focusing on industry engagement, focusing on community engagement, and focusing on being a voice and a face for Dallas College in their part of the county, and being, now being unburdened with faculty council meetings, with some of those things, those
more external rather than internal administrative.
Very much so.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think if the leadership, if those vice presidents and presidents and faculty had sort of understood where you were going at the beginning, I mean, do you think they would have like revolted? I mean, or do you think, it's sort of amazing that that it happened in a way?
I mean, look, I mean, certainly there were efforts to revolt. I mean, even around the leadership table, we'd get some head nodding, and then people would go back to their campus and try to pump the brakes a little bit, or kind of do the, well, let's wait them out. This is probably the way this is going to play out. We had faculty at individual campuses that they did some resolutions and stuff about keep the status quo. It would always be couched in the, well, we're not opposed to this, but it's happening too fast or it's too much. A lot of trying to slow the process down. But again, having the
board and staff,
having the board had already decided, so it made it easy for us to go, hey, we got to move. And the accreditation timeline, the advanced accreditation timeline we were operating on also helped, because there are things we had to do to meet the accreditation piece. And the way we approached it is, okay, we can slow down, but to the benefit of what and who? Those 1,000 students that couldn't graduate because of the SAC's 25% rule. The minute we unify, they can reverse transfer, they can graduate. They can get the credential that they already earned, but because of our goofy structure, stood in their way of earning it.
Yeah, amazing story. I was gonna ask a question. I totally went in and out of my head. I'm so stunned by it all. So let's talk about some of the benefits. I mean, how's it paying off? If you had to sort of list like the 3 biggest things that you see that are kind of like why it's worth it, what would they be?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, we're still early and we're still coming out of the COVID part for the student experience. Obviously, the student experience over this last year has looked very different because of COVID, but where we have uncovered some of the unique differences and challenges that stood in the way of students. So, I mean, some things that are small, right? That different campuses had different criteria for, putting holds on if you could register. So if you owed $50 at one campus, maybe you couldn't register, and maybe you could at another one. Well, removing some of those burdens have benefited students. The other part is scheduling, and this is one where has been a huge lift and a huge concern for faculty, because you heard me say earlier about the one institution you couldn't graduate in 2 years, because again, the faculty really did kind of control their schedule, and there wasn't great accountability always around that and about that. And so now we start with more of the student preference as we're scheduling. So yeah, I know, crazy. But that freaked people out all along, faculty specifically. You're going to centralize scheduling. You're going to have someone in the system office in front of a screen with some algorithm that's just going to churn it out and tell us what we have to teach and when we have to teach. And it really is again, I won't worry with the process, but it is a process that faculty get to ask for their preferences. And then we try to match where we can. But it's a very different process because we had 7 processes before. Now we have 1. And again, the students ultimately benefit. And so we're already getting that feedback from students about, oh my gosh, there's so much more availability of things now than there used to be when I was just at my campus. It didn't work with my schedule. Now it works with my schedule.
And they can use your free transit to go from one to the other. So so if they want to take something across town, they can do it. Do they do? Yeah.
Yeah. Now the other thing I'll mention, it gets back to the people part, is efficiencies. Now we didn't do this for efficiencies. We didn't do this for financial reasons. Like I said, when we first went and met with the SACS team, they were used to people sitting there and doing this for financial reasons, to consolidate. That's not our issue. We are very blessed here to have resources, and we say all the time, we go and do things because we have resources. We don't have to go do them to get resources. So it's a little bit different. And so, but the people part, again, it's the most painful aspect of this because not everybody's going to have a place, and some really talented people have had to exit here. It also means that, and I'll just say it, some of the dead wood is no longer here either.
Yeah. You don't have a faculty union. They do it.
We don't have a faculty union. We have a faculty association that kind of acts like a union, but Texas is not a union state. So that does provide us a little more flexibility than what some of you will be familiar with. But the people part, the efficiencies that we're operating on right now is about $11 million, is what that efficiency.
You've gained $11 million by doing this.
Yep, wow. Gained $11 million. And now we are reinvesting some of that back into the student success side, into the workforce side. But, we had 96 marketing staff. We had 78, I think, HR staff. So a lot of the decisions that had been made at the 7 locations to overbuild, excuse me, then we had to come in and address that. And so a lot of those efficiency dollars come from the operational side.
Yeah, got it.
We're reinvesting back into the instructional and student success side.
So I'm going to ask 2 more questions and then open it up, because this is so interesting and I could go on asking you forever. One is, the people in this audience, are the continuing education workforce side. So I'd love to hear what it means for them. And then last question, I'd love to hear, so CUNY is not going to do this tomorrow, but how can they start to go down this road? Not necessarily aiming for your end, but at least aiming for more efficiencies, more consolidation, more better student experience, common student experience. So let's start with the first one, the workforce, employers. You told me a great story about dealing with employers. I can share that story about Texas Instruments, that fairly early in this process, before we ever decided that we were going to unify, but we were just doing the nibbling around the edges of the building the network, expanding the network countywide. Texas Instruments obviously is a huge employer right here in our backyard, and they had a EET program, electrical engineering technology program, or we did in conjunction with them, with one of our colleges, and so they called the college president, and called the program leads and said, we've appreciated our association with the college and this program, but we're going to discontinue our association with the program because we're really not hiring the graduates that come out of the program. And the reaction at the college was kind of one of these, well, gosh, that's too bad. We hate that. But we've got full enrollment. We've got award-winning faculty. So everything's okay here. And so when Dr. May
got that call, it was a very different reaction. That was, wait a minute, how institution-centric can you be if you're touting your award-winning faculty, you're touting your full enrollment, but to what benefit?
Yeah.
Those students coming out of that program, where are they going to work if the largest leader in the field is not hiring them? So, we pulled together faculty from 3 different campuses at the time, 3 different colleges at the time, met with Texas Instruments multiple times, flew to Maine, where there was a program where they were hiring graduates out of, and obviously retooled our program to be much more responsive to what they were looking for, because if it was for what they were looking for, then it would be, as the industry leaders, then the rest of the sector would follow. And so we went from being fired to them writing a $500,000 check to our foundation to support the program, all just kind of changing the mindset and not to be institution centric. So I tell you that we got some great workforce folks that were at the colleges, and certainly the presidents had that responsibility. But that example demonstrates where you're looking at the wrong measures, the wrong things that actually matter. And so that's where starting with, my advice is you start with looking at the measures that matter.
Yeah.
We all track our own institutional measures, all the common ones that we care about, graduation rate and retention. And we look at, now look at placement and stuff as well. But there's people that are lost in the middle when we're looking at our measures. It's much like, our work that we do with K through 12, right? So K through 12 is focused on getting them to graduation and then off to the next thing. We at the 2-year level, focus on getting them through our measures and then worry about the universities. That's where our network came into play, where we were focused on the dotted lines. The dotted lines, that's what the network really was and is, the dotted lines between institutions, between partners, because that's where students live and float. So look at the data. You got to be intentional about looking at the data of what's happening to people in those dotted lines, and then have the really difficult conversations about what that means. And those really hard conversations that I had with that cross-functional team, where you have to step outside of yourself and not worry about what it means for you as an individual, what it means for your department, your division, your campus, and say, okay, can I be a part of something bigger along the way? And I will tell you, this organizational structure that we spent a lot of time going back and forth on, that initially was just really the Chancellor and I and our BCG team. There were different parts of this structure at different times that I would go, I don't really know what my role is in that. And there were other times like, I don't really know if that's my role. I don't like it. But kind of had to go, okay, well, that's not what it's about. And so just be really intentional at looking at the data and looking not just at your own institution data, but look at those dotted lines in between everything and try to find those commonalities where you can, where there are goofy process procedures, differences that get in the way. Because back to the culture thing, when we did decide to consolidate, there were certain things that we said, are important. The uniquenesses and the differences are important, and let's give honor to those where we can. So our athletic programs, the different mascots, the individual student newspapers and stuff, we left those in place and intact, so it still has the local flavor and vibe, but without some of the barriers getting in the way of the differences.
Amazing story. Questions? I mean, I have more questions, but I'm conscious of people having to listen, listening and not active. Questions for Justin? I mean,
I see
Angie?
one. I see one that popped up about accountability for centralized services that comes with consolidation, which is a great question that came up with us here some. That probably 10 years ago, we decided to centralize financial aid. because, we were having problems at the separate campuses about intake, and I'd never seen the leadership team at the time, the presidents at the time, vote so quickly to centralize something, but financial aid was that much of a problem, so we did. We also did a safety and study review and audit that system-wide, that, things like if there was a tragedy that happened at one location and our police officers at one campus went to that other campus to help them out, and was like, hey, we're in a firefight here, slide me a magazine for my pistol. We didn't have common ammunition, common training, so we centralized the police force. We have about 175 police officers, so we centralized that about 8 years ago. So we had done a couple of centralizations, but centralization has always been a dirty word. I'm sure it is there too, but it was always a dirty word here. But we had a couple of examples where things had kind of worked and made it less scary. But the question that came from Kimberly here is a good one, because the campuses, the colleges at the time were very concerned about that. Well, how do I know I'm not just going to get in a queue for my marketing projects or initiatives? Or how do I know that I'm still going to get the same level of service that I had when I was, quote, in control of it here? And so the structure part really has to speak to that. While there is a central reporting structure, there is a responsibility at each location for those functions. So they're still part of the president's, cabinet and team, even though the presidents don't have direct authority. Everybody kind of has ownership. And, there's this example that we talk about, the dead bird example. So the story is that, there's a dead bird that was at the front door at one of the campuses. And it had been there for a few days. And so when asked at that campus about, hey, what's up with that dead bird? And it was, boy, I'm glad somebody said something about that. Someone needs to take care of it. Well, we all have responsibility for the dead birds, right? So whoever's on campus has responsibility. The presidents don't have direct authority and responsibility for a lot of these functions now. But if they see that there's long lines in student services at their campuses, they have a responsibility to be an advocate for their campus and work with their colleagues and counterparts that report elsewhere to make sure that it gets done. And so, so we're still working on some of those accountability measures. We have launched a V2 Mom, which comes out at Salesforce, which is a visions and metrics and measures thing that gets down from the board level to the individual employee, that will help with the dead birds, but also help on the accountability of individuals and of departments and divisions. Because you heard me reference accountability earlier, we weren't always great about that. And that's one of the reasons we were overbuilt and oversubscribed at a lot of the locations, is that if somebody was failing, we just add another one, work around them. Because again, we had resources to do that.
Yeah.
And so again, that's also what led to some of the inequities that existed and some of the differences that existed.
Yeah. Amazing. So good question about in the chat about, student enrollment, retention, transfer, graduation. Have we seen, but we had time to see those numbers change? I mean, it has been the pandemic, a lot of other factors influencing them.
Yeah, no, we really hadn't had time since, again, it's only been officially since last July that we have been Unified Dallas College. And so we're still, still on the tail end of kind of the old system with that. And then, yeah, the uniqueness of the situation with COVID and the pandemic. But as you heard me say, one of the benefits earlier is that it's easier to get in now on the front end and to figure out schedule and stuff. And so again, we're getting positive feedback about that, but it's still too soon to tell how it'll impact enrollment and retention and graduation. We know graduation will actually increase.
Sure.
Again, we removed the SACS 25% rule. So students aren't stuck in that trap anymore.
And if you do a better job of connecting with the employers, placements will improve. I mean, that seems like a big piece of it to me. I mean,
It
I
is.
can just imagine employers in Dallas, like, which door do I knock on? Where do I go? Suddenly there's a place to go.
So here's the reaction, right? Is we all get insular and focused on our own stuff within our institution. That once we started talking about, we were thinking about doing this publicly, and then once we actually did it, we have 18 school districts within Dallas County. We'd convened a group of them, and their reaction was, "What took you so long? We're tired of having to deal with the differences and the uniqueness to establish relationships." The community partners and the industry folks, same sort of thing. And now with the presidents in their enhanced role to be out there engaging with business and industry differently, along with some focused elements of our workforce team to be able to do that. That really, from a workforce perspective, they really do see that the doors are open wider, because they have been used to, hey, I'm in this location down here by Cedar Valley College. Why can't I get access to what they've got up at Richland College up north? Why do I have to get stuck in your little silo down here? And so that's what I'm saying. What I said earlier, we just, we lifted that lid, and now everybody has an opportunity to engage differently.
And I trust you're starting to see sort of not specialization on the campuses, but if there were 3 electrical engineering programs, the one that's really good is now growing, and the ones that weren't so good are now growing. Is that?
That's exactly right. So we again, when we looked at the different models, we looked at, could we put signature programs in place, or what do distributed programs look like? And that was part of our educational master plan that again eventually led to the school of model. It does allow the quote best to float to the top. And because again, like our 3 nursing programs, was really kind of 2.5 programs, 2 really good, 1 a little shaky, but it allowed and caused some very difficult conversations amongst those nursing folks about what is going to be the surviving one, what's going to be the best, or is it going to be a mix or a hybrid of the best? But it fostered and pushed innovation in a different way. And so, we did some central things that a Center for Teaching and Learning, to have common faculty professional development, to have a center of innovation where we'll just try some stuff and try and see what works, and give some incentives to try some of those things that just wasn't happening before.
It's an amazing story. I hope someone's like writing it up as a case study or something. I mean, it's really, it's like we're going to take 2 of the states and consolidate them, and then we're going to divide, we're going to put North Dakota and South Dakota together, and we're going to divide California. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, it certainly hasn't been all, roses and puppies and rainbows all along the way. And it really is just the intentionality to have the really difficult conversations. And I called it, before we even decided of moving into the centralized thing, I called it the Stop the Stupid campaign, where we identify things that are just silly and goofy and get in the way. Let's identify it. And if we got to name names along the way, let's do that, and call it for what it is.
So what about competing for, I mean, a big thing at CUNY, and I'll say it, other people don't have to say it, is, they compete for the FTEs. Like, if the student goes to one campus and doesn't come to you, then the other campus gets the money. I guess that's over, but it is like, how does that benefit, sort of?
So it is a huge issue. The state, gave the allocation to the Dallas County Community College District, which was a sum of what the formula was, enrollment was producing at each of the locations. And then we distributed it from the system level at the time, kind of based on that. And so butts and seats, matters and makes a difference. And the example I used earlier when I was interim president of Brookhaven, that's why it was so important to that college to get that enrollment. And so it, caused us very early on to look at our funding allocation model differently. About 8 years ago or so, the state moved for 10% of our formula to be performance-based. Well, we internally decided to add on to that we put at the time another $43 million into incentives. So it was already causing our institutions to think about outcome
Yeah.
than
That's
enrollment.
really important.
And so, but you really do have to take a hard look at what the allocation model is.
Yeah.
And again, when you look at the measures that matter, what are we really trying to do here? And so just having enrollment, to have butts and seats, to be in programs that Texas Instruments wasn't hiring, that's the wrong focus.
Yep. Really so interesting. Other questions from the floor? My mouth is open. Angie, go for it.
Yeah, Justin, really fascinating. And again, thank you so much for sharing the experience, the measures that matter. You've talked about that a lot, and I'm wondering if you could just kind of illustrate and bring that to life. I mean, what's, on that dashboard that you have, what's one of the measures that matter that really strikes you as something that you really look at all the time and is important?
Yeah, so I'll answer that by telling a quick story. That when we decided to do the consolidation, I was meeting with our IR reps, our institutional data folks and IE folks, who, by the way, we're not enthralled by the notion of this consolidated thing. That's a pretty tough crowd. And so meeting with them, and one of them, was showing me their measures at their college. And I got to the end, I'm like, okay, but what about what's actually happening to students once they leave you? I mean, we measure for transfer, that's in there. But what about job? What about getting people into the workforce? And so we spent a lot of time talking about that with that group, because they were focused on, to be fair to them, that they were largely focused on what SACS cared about. What the accreditor cared about is what they were measuring for institutional effectiveness. So it was that lens. It wasn't the larger community lens. So it wasn't those dotted lines in between the systems and the institutions. So one of the ones that we pay attention to a lot is the job market. We have a center that we established. It's a labor market intelligence center that obviously is looking all the time at data about how do our programs, first of all, align with demands from a labor perspective, and then people that are coming out of our programs, certificate, associate, whatever the programs are, where are they going, where they ended up, and what are their wages coming out of those programs. And that, you guys understand workforce side clearly, but that messaging was a real struggle for some of our friends on the academic side that were saying, you only care about that workforce stuff. And, I was in some very heated conversations on stage and spotlights with some of those folks that, don't we all kind of care about a job at the end of this? I mean, we all went through our educational endeavors for some reason, and ultimately a paycheck matters. And so it's a long-winded way of saying, we look at where do our students go when they leave our doors, however it is they leave our doors, and try to track them best we can, and specifically look at wages to see, did we improve? Because there are programs that we all have and have had that students can go through those programs, and we can check off the boxes and get credit for, even the performance measures, get credit for, but the students, they don't get the benefit that we don't provide the benefit that we really should have to them.
I mean, that's what I would say about this. This is not just centralization. This is a different lens at the top. And so, you know, it's not just like sort of consolidating for consolidating sake. It's that Dr. May has a vision of what matters, and you and Dr. May have a vision of what matters that is innovative. And, you know, you, in order to make that happen, you kind of have to bring everyone together. I mean,
Well,
so the two
again,
things
that's
going on here, I think.
yeah, again, that Texas Instruments example of everything is fine here.
Yeah.
And that's the president
Yeah.
of that college, that campus that was saying that, because her measures were, here's what's important to our institution, without taking a step back of, well, what are we actually doing here?
Yeah. So more questions from the floor. I have one more. So, I mean, I think about CUNY, and again, you know, I would far from presume that CUNY wants to go here. Like we're not assuming that. But in one way, it sounds like you can go there gradually. In another way, it sounds like until you really pull the trigger and the board says we're going and SAC says we're going, it's kind of hard to go there. I mean, you know, what's the combination there?
Well, again, we nibbled around the edges best we could. And I think, you know, Dr. May would tell you, he didn't go into this saying, let's consolidate. He saw it as a distraction, that the sax was going to be a distraction, the drama and the angst was going to be a distraction, and that we just need to focus on doing good and doing better. And let's not worry about that. But once you take a step back and go, okay, have we gone as far as we can? What does nibbling around the edges really mean? And it's going to mean something different there than it meant here. But again, looking at the data, being intentional, finding out what is happening on those dotted lines between your institutions and others in your communities that represent those students, and really go, okay, how can we improve things for them? That, you know, you'll get as far as you can in that, and that may be as far as you can get, and that's okay too, right? Because it is a huge lift. I mean, yeah, had we taken a vote, hey, who wants to unify, we know what the result would have been.
Yeah.
No one would have said, yeah, let's go for this. And we certainly have employees through the years that they saw the differences, they saw what was happening, where some of the barriers were, and they would say, hey, you know, we should do something about this. But for the most part, you know, change is hard. People don't, it's hard to walk by faith and go, I don't know what this is going to look like at the end, but I know we need to start down this path and do something different. And so, you know, I think if you just focus on really engaging in the sacred cows. We had
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we had one of our team members. They got a stuffed cow, a little stuffed animal cow, and would bring it to our meetings and go, okay, there are no sacred cows here. We are again part of the Stop the Stupid campaign. Let's identify the things that we know are things. Let's try to discover new things where we can, try to figure out what solutions we can get to. But it's ultimately your point earlier about the view from the top. It's about what problems are we trying to solve?
Yeah.
If we're trying to solve for, can I have a full classroom and award-winning faculty? Okay, well, that's one problem to solve. But if it's, are we meeting the demands of our industry and our community and getting people in jobs and improving their lives? That's another problem to solve.
Yeah.
And so I do think it forces us, when we look at all of our data and our measures, to go, okay, what is this actually telling us? What's the actual story here?
Yeah, that's great. It's such bold leadership. I mean, it's amazing again, really. I think we may be able to give people 10 minutes back, not because it's not fascinating, but I think I'm guessing everyone on the call says, you know, is this like, it's like caring about what life is like on Mars, you know.
Well, what I can say about that is, you know, to some degree, I have been in your seat of, wait a minute, this is what are we talking about here? And it's easy when you're dealing, I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier when you're dealing with the incremental.
Yeah.
Okay, we recognize this is a problem. Let's get together and address this. This is a barrier. This is a challenge. So let's do that. And the way that Dr. May talks about it, it's a click on a ratchet. You know, if you're familiar with that, with a tool, you make a click, one little click at a time.
Yeah,
You can't
incremental
click it
can make a
back.
difference. Yeah. That's really interesting. Is last question, is the plan, is your education master plan, is that public? Is that available? I'd love to see it.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's on our website, but yeah, certainly could share that with any of you, all of you that may be interested. And you know, again, having been in your seat, I know there's probably some questions that you have, and some that may occur to you later. So, you know, I'll make myself available to any or all of you at any point if you need more.
Super
insight
helpful,
or detail.
super interesting, super helpful, super inspiring. Really, thank you. Angie, do you want to say a last word?
Yeah. So again, thank you very much, Justin. Incredibly important insights. And again, the notion of a labor market information service has absolutely come up. And so again, I think the totality of what you've done is impressive. And I think there's probably chunks of the thinking and examples that I think we'll really take to heart. And it's also really helpful when we start to hear some of the same themes executed differently across the country with different systems. But some of what you've mentioned definitely resonates with folks from the Florida system who we've talked to, you know, President from the North Carolina Johnson Community College, as well, and some others. So thank you very, very much, and appreciate your generosity with your time. Obviously, you are very busy, so thank you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you
Great.
very, very much. Thanks everyone for joining. And Justin, I owe you a big favor, so I hope I can return it someday.
Not at all. Appreciate it. You guys have a
Excellent.
good day.
Thank you.